Good evening, everyone. As always, it's wonderful to be here. A big thank you to everyone who's been offering donations this last week, supporting the cause and making it possible for me to continue to teach and offer these Sunday evenings for free and put them on YouTube and all this work. So thank you truly for supporting this. Right before the program, someone sent me this beautiful email. Actually, it's from Wesley, and I think Wesley's here tonight. And Wesley said, just a big thank you to me for all the support and the love. And, there's so many people out there that just receive these teachings after the fact. They're in a different time zone, a different part of the world. And that's the beauty of the internet, is it's been connecting us. So my heart's with you all. So one of the things that I would like to speak about tonight is that this notion of the universal Christ. And, it is, we're getting into the holiday season, and, if you have children, we all get a little bit crazy about Santa Claus. If you have a family and loved ones, we get a little bit crazy, just all hanging out together and rushing around to this party or that party. But it's a great question, is, well, what is it that we're celebrating? And if you speak to any anthropologist who's looked at the Bible and looked at pagan traditions, and there's all this debate over, well, was Christmas really Jesus' birthday and all this? And to me, it ends up just being a waste of time. What I would like to speak about, not so much about, say, Jesus, but rather to speak about the Christ, this message that Jesus brought forward. So many of us, there's a silly joke, and Richard Rohr often says this. He says that Christ is not Jesus's last name. It's not his last name. The Christ is this presence within all of us. It's this fundamental presence of divinity that we are born into. And again, we could spend the whole night critiquing the Catholic Church, the Christian Church, for all the confusion that they've caused there. And I would just invite all of us just to forget all that. Just put it down if there's any confusion. And can you open your hearts and just acknowledge, I am the Christ. What you are is the Christ. The very fundamental presence of aliveness. That's the Christ. This fundamental presence of innate goodness and divinity. This is your Christ-like nature. We are born into it. And again, with Catholicism and the different traditions, after the fact, after Jesus came and said, all of you are forgiven because you are sons and daughters of the Most High, you are the living presence of God. You are absolutely beautiful. You are absolutely divine. This is what he came to teach. And then after the fact, churches came up with an idea of original sin, and this idea that we're all sinners and we have to do some crazy penance and earn our way into heaven in a very divisive way. That there's Christians and non-Christians. What Jesus was saying was, all of us are the Christ. The Christ is in matter itself. It's in all beings, all life forms, all creatures. All creatures. without exception. This morning I was, I get up pretty early and I do my meditation and do a little bit of study. And I was, afterwards I normally I have these two silly little dogs. They look like bunny rabbits almost, these two little dogs that I have. And, I took them out and it was snowing and the sun was just, coming up. And the ponderosa pines were just, just dancing, sparkling with light. A little bit of wind blows and then it'll just dump, some snow, off the branches. And then you'll see 10,000 crystals will just be lit up in the air. And this is what it means to see the Christ, to be the Christ. You have to be the Christ to see the Christ. You're connected with your divinity and you say, oh, this world is good, it's divine, it's holy. Our brothers and sisters are good, are divine, are holy. Now, of course, sometimes as human beings, there's a big discrepancy between our holiness, our innate holiness, and how we show up in the world, how we show up. So I had this wonderful morning with meditation and just deep silence and some reading. I read the story of Paul. And then afterwards, I come out and my 5-year-old wakes up and, sometimes she wakes up and even though she's really cute and beautiful and divine, sometimes she's a little monster and she just gave us hell for like the next, 5 or 6 hours. We all got in the car and said, okay, let's go to church and I'll take you skiing afterwards. And, sounds like a beautiful little Sunday. And oh boy, she fought it just tooth and nail. And we didn't even make it out of the neighborhood. She was just screaming and having a fit. And they said, okay, look, let's just all stop. We'll regroup here. Regroup. Let's see if we can shift our perspective. And then we as parents, we have to look, what is it just the child's fault? Did she, wake up as a little monster, or did mom and dad not feed her enough? And so this is how our Christ-like presence shows up. It doesn't show up as, we are holier than our brothers and sisters and our children. The Christ shows up in our humanity, our willingness to look at our actions, our behaviors. Did I drop the ball? Did my wife drop the ball? Did we both drop the ball? Why is the 5-year-old triangulating us? Did we just not feed her enough? And so we brought her home. A failed attempt to go to church. And, we brought her home, got some food in her belly, sat her down, let her have some peace, calm. And then we just tried again later. And this time it was just Dad. And so her and Dad, got in the car. We went skiing and then ice skating. We had a real Colorado day. And sometimes all of us, we just need a little bit more time. Our ego is always rushing. And as soon as our ego starts to rush, it starts to build this pressure, this intensity. And then we step away from our Christ-like nature, our innate divinity, our good-heartedness, our innocence. And so I was trying to rush my daughter out the door to church, and her ego felt pressured and she revolted. She's a 5-year-old, right? And this happens whether we're 5 or 65. We can get these little tips where we take something so seriously. And as soon as we begin to take things seriously, as soon as we get out our a little blowtorch, All of us have a little blowtorch we carry with us. As soon as we get it out and start believing, I need to light this room on fire, we've stepped out of our Christ-like presence. But if we're willing to be humble, then we come back to our innocence. We come back to our innocence. And this is one of the great things that Christ taught. There's so many stories, where he just gently challenged, the religious clerics at the time. And he challenged them with humility. With humility. They were demanding his respect. And he gave his respect to the poor, the suffering, those who really needed to hear from him. Who needed to hear from him. And again, this is just a story of, how the ego operates. Do we listen to the poor, the suffering within our own self? Or do we get excited about hanging out with the rich and the famous, or the people who have the big names, or 10 million Instagram followers in 2020? That's what people get excited about. A movie star. I have friends who live in Los Angeles, and a lot of times they name drop, producers and movie stars and this and that. And it's like, these are just human beings. How about you name drop the beauty of your own heart? The beauty of your own heart. Can you get excited about your own heart? Not if you see, I don't even know who someone famous would be. Not if you see Brad Pitt. He's just some dude. That's all he is. He's just some guy. He may be handsome, but he's just some guy. What if you gave that type of attention? What if you were like a paparazzi with your own Christ-like nature, taking pictures of your heart, your divinity, your goodness, worshiping it, saying this is what's important, is this goodness within me, this inner Christ. I want to get to know this. I want to follow this inner Christ. This inner Christ. But in order to follow this inner Christ, we have to shift our perspective. We have to shift it out of our anger, our aggression, our depression, our anxiety, our hopelessness, and shift into trust, into faith. And relax. And as you begin to relax your body, your nervous system, you begin to see your divinity. If I was a yoga asana teacher, I would be speaking right now about our yoga glow. Your yoga glow is your Christ-like nature. After any of us, when we do, 45 minutes, an hour, 90-minute yoga practice, we come out of that studio and we're glowing with light because we've spent our time caring about ourselves, about our divinity. We've relaxed our body, and then the divinity comes forward into expression. The divinity is always here. Again, Christ told us you're born with it. You're born with it. But then we get so beat up by life, it gets covered up. And this is what in yoga they call veils or kleshas. Our Christ-like nature, our yoga glow, our divinity gets covered in our own personal suffering, the definitions of ourselves that we've taken on from others. Your mom and dad told us we're no good, so instead of seeing our divinity and saying, oh yes, I am divine, I have a pure heart, Oftentimes if mom or dad ignore us, we have this belief, then we develop a belief that we are unworthy of love. And it's an interesting thought to think that you are unworthy of love. When you are a child of the Most High, you're made in the image and the likeness of God. The likeness part, that's the Christ. You are made in the Christ. Made in the Christ. But many of us, we come into this world and we're confused. This morning, like I was saying, I read the story of Paul. And Paul was one of these guys who, it's an interesting story. He was an investigator, and he would go around investigating people who are practicing Christianity, who follow Jesus' teachings. And he would prosecute them. He would persecute them. He would line them up to be, to be hanged or to be, sent to jail or stoned or whatever it was. So he was a man who had a very heavy heart. He had a brutal job. Could you imagine if your job was to round up people of a particular religion and then lock them up? And he was righteous about it, thinking this is the path. We got to get these Christians or whatever it is. And he was walking on this road to a new town. I think it was Damascus. And Christ came to him. Christ came to him in all his glory. This was after Jesus had died, was resurrected, gone to heaven, did the whole song and dance. But Christ came to Paul while Paul was going to work, walking to a faraway city to persecute some more Christians. And Jesus showed himself. Christ showed himself. So why? And he said, why are you going to persecute me? Why are you going off to persecute me? The Christ. The Christ. And so here again, Christ was saying that I am everywhere. I am in your brothers and sisters, not just in Christians, but everywhere. And this incredible shift in perspective happened in this man who was going after and persecuting Christians. He became one of the greatest followers of Christ's teachings. At that moment, he had this most holy conversion, this new way of seeing. His heart woke up and he saw divinity everywhere. He said, gosh, I can't go persecute my brothers and sisters. I'm here to spread the good news that my brothers and sisters are good. They're not to be prosecuted. They're good. They're holy. They're divine. They're divine. And see, this message of the Christ is universal. We are all Christ in our hearts. And then a great question is, are we Christ in our manifestation? In our manifestation. And this is where, being a human being is a very humbling experience. I'm actually a part of a Catholic men's group. And it's an interesting experience because I don't go in there as a spiritual teacher. I go in there as just a student with just some other fellas at the church, and we all get together and we just speak about these teachings and how they touch our lives. And it's a nice experience for me because I can step out of the role of being a teacher and just be a normal fella, who struggles sometimes with his wife and his 5-year-old. I have a teenage daughter I struggle with, I struggle with, being cold and slipping on the ice, all the silly things, having a body, getting sick and growing old. Struggle with all the things that anyone else would. And so in order to manifest our Christ-like presence, it's important that we are connected to humility, to our innocence. Humility is a willingness to say, I'm sorry. It's a willingness to step back. It's a willingness to stop arguing. It's a willingness to unlearn so much of what we've been taught. So much of what we've been taught. For many people who struggle with the Christian faith, they put up a wall and they begin to hate Jesus because of something that the church did, the church that came after Jesus. And what I'm inviting is a new perspective, a shift in that. So instead of becoming entrenched in hating, do-gooder judgmental Christians, evangelicals who, aren't really connected to the Christ, they're really connected to fundamentalism. Instead of focusing on that, can you unlearn? Can you unlearn what you've learned from those individuals and their manifestation? And can you relearn what it means to be connected to this inner Christ? Can you unlearn the cultural conditioning, the confusion of whatever the popes and the bishops and all this kind of stuff taught for a couple thousand years? I always think it's funny. There was, once upon a time, reincarnation was in the Bible. And I think it was in something like 567 or something. They took it out of the Bible, the popes or the bishops or whoever it was, I could be wrong about that date because I don't have the best mind. But at one point in the beginning, it was in there. Just like most universal teachings acknowledge the truth of reincarnation. Hell, the whole experience of Jesus coming again, that's the reincarnation. And then people argue against it, and it's just silly. See, people get silly. So can we forget about the silliness and come back to this basic universal presence of Christ, which is in all of us? And this is a presence thing. It's not a biblical argumentative thing. It's a presence thing. The doorway is through humility. As you walk through the doorway of humility in the space of your heart, you start to feel this profound innocence waking up. This innocence is the opposite of the feeling you get when you have your egoic blowtorch out and you're ready to light everyone on fire in the room. This innocence is pure. It's gentle. It's tender. But yet it's ridiculously strong. It's ridiculously powerful. Ridiculously powerful. And it's such a beautiful integration of absolute innocence with profound indestructibility. And by indestructibility, I mean your innocence cannot be actually harmed. It cannot be destroyed. Your egoic innocence can, your egoic innocence, like the innocence that you have in your mask, that can be harmed and replaced with harshness. That's what most of us have done. Most of us are sensitive beings. And we come into a world like this, which is difficult, painful, confusing. It's a world where we have nailed people like Jesus to crosses. It's a crazy world. It's okay to say that it's a crazy world. And so our egoic innocence shows up as sensitivity, like hypersensitivity. And when our hypersensitivity is challenged or ignored or abused, the ego then puts up walls, and then we become harsh inside. We become hard. We become entrenched. But I assure you that under that, deeper than that, is this profound innocence, which can never be harmed. Never be harmed. And this is what Christ was inviting us to wake up to, was something beautiful, something innocent, yet so radically strong. And so Jesus was an individual who knew the Christ and who lived the Christ to the best of his ability. He would not let his ego lead him. He wasn't going to let it lead him. But how many of us can say that? I will not let my ego lead me. Most of us, we allow our ego to lead us, and then we get ourselves in big trouble. Big trouble. We start fighting with our husband, our father, our sister, our brother, our wife, our children, whoever it is, our neighbor. I have two friends, and they're both just great. They're just great people. They have good hearts. And each friend came to me one day. They're neighbors. They like live right next to each other out. They both have big farms, and they used to always play, and their kids used to play all together. And then one day they came to me. One of them came with this big story how the other one wronged him. I thought, gosh, wow, that's really shocking. That's very crazy. I can't believe she did that. Wow. And I thought, it sounds kind of crazy that she would do this to him. And then later I ran into her, and she told me what he did and how crazy it was and how terrible and how he's, completely psychotic. And I'm just thinking here's two really good people. Two really good people. Good hearts. And they've lost their minds. Lost their minds. There's this old story in the South about I can't even remember it let's see, the Hatfields and McCoys. And these two families, and I think once upon a time they were friends, and they started fighting, and they just fought for generations. Became entrenched in the ego. Became entrenched in the ego. What Christ is inviting us to become entrenched in is our divine presence. Our divine presence. It's an incredible invitation is to wake up, to see that what you are is good, is holy, is strong, is merciful. Have you ever thought of yourself as merciful? To give mercy to a brother or sister. It feels exquisite to be merciful. Like the Buddha taught, it feels like hell to be angry and divided, to be angry, the Buddha says, like holding a hot coal. You are burning. You may think you're hurting the other one, and there's a good chance you are, but you are burning when you hold on to a hot coal. But could you imagine yourself as merciful? The Buddhist term for that is compassionate. And I don't mean in some do-gooder way. True compassion. When you realize how you've hurt someone, sometimes it's just the tone of our voice that we hurt someone. We didn't see them. We didn't see their Christ-like presence. And we do this violence to each other all the time because we don't see each other's Christ-like presence. One of the reasons people love to fall in love. One of the reasons people love to fall in love, because it's one of the few times in life when we actually see another's divinity. We often mix in all kinds of projection and attraction and all other kind of monkey business, but it's one of the few times when we fall in love and when we're with babies, sometimes little children. I was at the checkout today at the natural food store after I had just a really tough day with my daughter in the morning. Boy, did she give us such a hard time. And I took her skiing. As soon as she got in the car with Dad, she was just a little angel. I took her skiing and then ice skating, and I was really tired after doing those two. And I was trying to run into the supermarket. My little girl's like, "Daddy, I don't want to go in." I was like, "Come on, I'll just be a minute." And we go in there and the cashier just looked at her. My daughter has these really long eyelashes, and it just stops people always. They're like, "Look at those eyelashes." And then they look at her eyes. And they say, "Oh, she's a little angel." And I just smiled. I was like, "She is a little angel. She is a little angel." That's the truth. That's the truth. We are all little angels. That's the truth. But sometimes our egos get the best of us. That's a different kind of truth. That's a different kind of truth. So anyways, I'll just check out some of these questions here. Let's see here. And just a big hello to everyone. Big hello to everyone. This one's from Kate. Kate, I believe she's out on the West Coast there. Hi, Craig. I have a question. As you know, I'm in a kundalini transformation. Today, for a while, I was able to open to the sensations and the disorientation and actually get excited about what it was transforming me into. And then I read about this energy getting stuck on one side, and I got fearful, and I gave myself a panic attack. Yeah, that's oftentimes what we do here on planet Earth. We scare ourselves with something we read on the internet. And I tell you what, if you ever look up or study like psychological disorders, there's this book called the DSM-4, the DSM-5, the Diagnostical Manual for Mental Disorders, something like that. I should know that book by heart, but it's like this fat, and it has all the disorders, according to a Western psychologist. If you start reading that book, you might think that, there's something really wrong with you, that you are depressed, that you have anxiety, that you have, borderline personality disorder or something crazy, and so we have to have some discernment about what we read here, and we have to have discernment about how quickly we give our power away to something we read. So, Kate writes, "Hi, Craig. As you know, I'm in a kundalini transformation. Today, for a while, I was able to open to the sensations and the disorientation, that comes. Sometimes when you're opening to something big, you're going to feel a lot of sensations and a lot of disorientation." So she was doing this, and she was actually getting excited about what it was transforming her into. So this is you connecting with your Christ presence. So just right there, you're connecting with your Christ presence, as you can look at their evolutionary path. You can look at this light waking up in you, and you can say, wow, There's something divine, something holy coming. Something divine, something holy happening. Even though it's painful, even though it's difficult, there's something divine happening here. This is, again, one of the great things that Jesus taught. Hell, he was on the cross and he was still teaching. He was forgiving. Forgiving and allowing that moment while he was being nailed to a cross to be a transformative experience. Ridiculously painful, took his life, but he was connected to his truth. And so when we're connected to our truth, we are free, whether we feel good, whether we feel bad, whether we are disoriented, whether our world is upside down, whether people like us or don't like us, whether we're having panic attacks or not. If we are connected to our truth, we are living in freedom. And when you're living in freedom, you're connected to your power. Your power. But if you go and then read something and you give your power away, then you start getting lost in catastrophic thinking. So she goes on to write, and then I read about the energy getting stuck on one side. I got fearful, gave myself a panic attack. Can you address this thing about the one side for me? I am fearful. And she's stuck. And what do I have to look forward to on the other side of this transformation? Need some hope. Yeah. So I'll keep just turning it back to the message of Christ. Christ said, you cannot serve two masters. We must only serve one. So the master I'm inviting you to serve, Kate, is your goddess nature, your highest truth. So your highest truth, you are sitting there, you're experiencing this transformational energy, even though it's intense, there's a lot of sensations there. That moment you're connected to your goddess nature. The next moment you gave your power away to your egoic consciousness. You started to serve a second master. You became what the Buddha called divided. When you become divided inside, our chakras will close or they'll become split. They're not really split, but what happens is when you are divided, energy just kind of shoots to one side or the other. With kundalini, for example, your power centers are in your belly, your lower belly and your solar plexus. When you step into fear, that means you've stepped out of the center line. You've stepped out of the central channel, which is how we live. When we live from mastery, we're living in the central channel. But when you step off to the side, you start to serve a lesser master. You give your power away, and you get lost in your egoic mind. You'll get lost in your egoic mind. And so then the energy doesn't flow up through the center of you. It'll kind of flow over here or over there. And it's all about coming back to the center. What are you in your highest truth, Kate? You are a goddess. A goddess. A goddess is strong. A goddess is unmoved by something she reads on the internet. A goddess stays with her direct experience. Her direct experience of her divinity. If a goddess sees her ego coming forward and starting to scream or getting lost in fear, the goddess will comfort the fear and say, now, sweetie, relax, breathe. It's okay. It's okay. Relax, breathe. It's okay. And, if you live in California and, you're not in Colorado where there's, starting to be, a couple feet of snow on the ground. If you're in California, go lay in the grass. Connect to Mother Earth. Let yourself be held. Let yourself melt. Call upon God to come into you, to hold you, to remind you of your strength. And come back to the center line. That's the invitation here. Come back to the other side. What do I have to look forward to on the other side of this transformation? You being a goddess who is unmoved by fear. Unmoved. That's a good thing. And unfortunately for us here on planet Earth, the way the spiritual path works is if you want to be a goddess, if you want to discover fearlessness, unconditional love, unconditional strength, God will pile on experiences that are overwhelming. So there's like a perfect math to this. God will pile on experiences that are overwhelming because what she is wanting you to realize is there's something within you which is indestructible. Something within you that's holier than the ego, grander than the ego, mightier than the ego. So God gave us all an ego, which is loud and obnoxious. God also gave us these beautiful hearts and this incredible strength within. But how many of us actually know our strength? Not many. Not many. In order for you to step into your truth, to realize your strength, we must be challenged. Because when we are challenged, we begin to reach deep within and say, oh, that's right. I'm not just a small ego, the fearful presence and insecure nature. I am the Christ. I am the goddess. That's what I am. If life is too comfortable, we don't grow. We just rest in our egoic nature, eating, chocolate cake all day and getting fat or whatever people do, when things are really comfortable, sleep in bed all day. And, if everything's spoon-fed and handed to us, we don't grow. We kind of give into sloth. But when we're challenged by something mighty, we must discover something mighty within to rise to the occasion. To rise to the occasion. So that's a beautiful question. Okay, so here's a question from Miriam. Thank you, Craig. You're not really saying I haven't heard before. And my heart needed to hear it again today. Putting down the blowtorch now. Yes, Miriam. Beautiful. Beautiful. And I think we all know this, that we have a blowtorch. I stole that term from my friend Ivy in Beverly Hills there. She reminded me about having a blowtorch. Because oftentimes that's what our ego's like. It's just this blowtorch. It just wants to light the world on fire. I saw this terribly horrific and frightening and just crazy, hilarious movie, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Quentin Tarantino movie. And the lead character is Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt. And it's just such a great movie, but it's terrible to its violence. A total shocker. But Leonardo, one of his characters is to have a blowtorch, and he just has his blowtorch. And like the blowtorch, could you imagine the ego that invented the blowtorch? Like, we need something that can just light people on fire, light things on fire. It's a crazy thing, but this is a manifestation that comes out of an ego who's deeply disturbed, deeply in pain, deeply hurting. It came out, I think, in World War I or World War II, just a horrific time in history. But each of us have seen, sometimes we get out our blowtorch when someone cuts us off in traffic. We step away from this universal Christ-like nature that we're born into. We start cursing the person. We start speeding up, or maybe slamming on the brakes. That's a fun one too. If we play these games as humans, we really are crazy human beings. What we do to each other, it is absolutely crazy. It's a crazy world. We are given these divine souls, Christ-like natures, and yet we beat each other up. We violate each other. We rip each other's heads off. We project, we wound, we attack. And all of this is just unnecessary suffering. Unnecessary suffering. And as we begin to shift in perspective out of our ego, as we begin to walk in this world, and our hearts are open like Paul's heart was open, this great transformation can begin to take place. Great transformation. Where we see that we are the Christ. That we are holy. That we are pure. That we are innocent. When you see your innocence, all these teachings that Jesus brought forward about being forgiven starts to make sense. When you feel your fundamental innocence, when you feel the innocence of your child, and even a child who betrays you, who attacks you, who abandons you, who gives up on you, when you see his innocence, forgiveness begins to show up. Understanding shows up. You see, the kid who's struggling with being addicted to his phone, or being addicted to drugs, or being addicted to hating us, or whatever it is. You see in their divinity that they're holy, but that they're also confused. We forgive them. We forgive them. And it's through forgiveness that our heart opens, and we begin to see that they are suffering. I am suffering. Our father who was an alcoholic, we see that he is divine, and yet really suffering, incredibly suffering. Incredibly suffering. We forgive him. We forgive him. Forgiveness helps us to come back to the tenderness and compassion and our universal Christ-like nature. You can't truly forgive someone unless you know they're divine. And you know they're human. It's like as humans, we're idiots. Like we really are idiots. We really are idiots. I saw this evening, I sat down, and sometimes I, just click around on YouTube, and I like to watch some of the SNL skits, and they did this skit this week, I guess it was last night, about Christmas time in the United States, and it was just showing like all these different families, so it showed one family in California, and just super progressive and completely politically correct, and and just so utterly divided, and so they were totally left wing and just hating the right wingers. And then it went to some place like Ohio or Michigan, and and it zoomed in on that family and their family dinner, and they were all just fighting, and like, well, how could anyone not like Trump, and who would be an idiot enough to vote Democrat? And then to go back to the Democrat one, who would be an idiot enough to vote for Trump? It just showed this utter divisiveness, utter divisiveness, of just the American realm where we're just fighting with each other, hating each other, attacking each other. We have created the most dualistic system. The most dualistic system. Us versus them. Us versus them. Richard Rohr spoke once, and he said, one of the beautiful things about countries who have a three-party system is it's hard for them to play the us against them card. There's three choices, and that confuses the mind. When there's another choice, the third way, it's not this and it's not that. When there's three, it's like, oh, the mind starts to become disoriented and say, oh, okay, there's options here. There's different ways of seeing things. There's different ways of seeing. But when you're in a dualistic system, like we are, we can just hate each other's guts forever. Yeah, forever. And our friends, the Russians, they can, the Russian hackers, I want to be clear about that. I know some really good Russians too. But the Russian hackers, they can have a field day with us. They can come in and really, make us fight, which is a funny thing, which just shows. It's like, who's the smart one here in the room? One's manipulating the other two. The other two. But could we imagine a world where we're not at each other's throats? So soon, for those of us who have families, we'll be hanging out with families. Oftentimes there's great tension, great tension in families, great tensions, old heartaches and pains. And if you have a father who's an alcoholic, or a mother who ignores you, or a sister or brother who attacks you, who blames you, who judges you, who projects on you, can you remember that they are divine, that they are holy? And can you forgive them for being human, for being confused, for being lost? Once upon a time, this fellow went out into the desert, and he sat out there for 40 days. And as the story goes, the devil came to visit him. The devil was his own mind. It filled his head with ideas, fears, lustful thoughts, powerful thoughts, delusive thoughts, divided thoughts, grandiose thoughts, angry thoughts, superior thoughts. And that man looked at those thoughts and said, no, I know who I am. I know who I am. And so the great question is, do you know who you are? Do you know who you are? Are you willing to live from this truth? Are you willing to live from this truth, in you, through you, as you? It's a great question. Great question. Okay. I'll just look at the comments here just a little bit more, so make sure I didn't miss anything. Taylor writes, Craig, it's sad to see people's innocence in such a crazy world. It's very sad to see people's innocence in such a crazy world. Yeah. Yeah, it can be. It can be heartbreaking. It can be absolutely heartbreaking, to see people's innocence, the tenderness. And one of the things that we have to do is to allow our hearts to break. Yeah, break open. Because oftentimes what we do is our hearts break and then we become jaded. And we don't want to end up jaded. Life's too short to end up jaded. Dawn writes, what if sadness is just compassion waiting to emerge? That's the truth. Well said, Dawn. Well said. Well said. If you have sadness and you connect that with strength, it comes forward in a manifest way. As tenderness, as compassion, as divinity. As divinity. And see, especially with as divided as our country is right now, and as the world is, and we've all been suffering, under this sin of division. Sin means basically to be confused. The word got interpreted as meaning we are very bad people, but what it means is we're confused. That's all it means. When you sin is you got confused. We're confused. And we've been deeply confused by our own divisiveness. Our own divisiveness for many years. And so, I'm going to invite you all, at the end here, why don't we just close our eyes for a couple minutes here? And just to feel the love of your hearts, the goodness of your hearts, the purity of your hearts. And if there's pain there, if there's heartache there, just gently breathe into the heartache, giving it full permission to be here. Love doesn't push anything away. Like Christ, it welcomes the poor, the downtrodden, the sick. When we are connected to our Christ, we welcome the good, the bad, the ugly within us. We say, I see you, I love you, and I care. I see you, I love you, and I care. Just taking a couple of deep, full belly breaths there. Just breathing, feeling, smiling. And can you commit over this next month, while we are in winter, just to go inward a little bit more fully, to connect with your divinity, your Christ-like presence, a little bit more deeply, to say yes to what is good, and true, beautiful, innocent about your nature. Can you commit spending less time getting lost in the internet, getting lost in family drama, getting lost in the everyday struggles? Can you just spend a little bit more time going inward, loving yourself, knowing yourself, experiencing yourself? So just breathing in this universal Christ-like nature that we all are, smiling at ourselves, our brothers and sisters, the beauty of this planet. All beings waking up to this love. And so, it's been my absolute pleasure to be here with you all. Just one quick announcement. My Wednesday night meditation. Wednesday night, the my guess is that was the 18th of December. I won't be offering a guided meditation that night. I'll be at my daughter's Christmas performance, but I will be there in spirit. And I plan to do a Christmas night meditation, 7 p.m. Mountain Time, if anyone wants to join. Details will be on my website, and I'll put it up on Facebook as well. So may peace be with you all, and have a wonderful night. I will be back next Sunday for Satsang next Sunday. So peace be with you all. Good night. Good night, everyone.